None shall leave this place unless you subscribe.
We are talking The Grieving from 2025. And let me ask you a question. Do you like the Insidious movies? Because if you do, you might like this one, because this is very, very similar to the Insidious movies in a lot of ways. So it focuses on this Italian-American woman who living in the States, her father living in Italy, and at the beginning of the movie he dies. And he is cremated, and the daughter goes over to Italy to get his ashes, but she wants to bury them next to her mother's ashes, but she has to wait till she's allowed to do that, and she's given some instructions that she can't open the urn and all the rest of it. But she soon is visited by what appears to be visions of her father, perhaps even a haunting, and the severity of these hauntings get progressively worse. So she contacts a spirit medium who helps her understand what is happening to her, and perhaps even visit the spirit realm to try and help her father, who may be under the thrall of a demon. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. Now, I will go through the positives in just a second, but I want to just address one of the negatives, which I will come back to, and that is that this movie is generic. Now, I would say that that is a fair criticism, but at the same time, it might be very similar, especially to the movies like Insidious. But I don't necessarily think that's an indicator of it being a bad movie, just that it's very, very similar to what you've seen before. That doesn't say to me that the quality of the movie is necessarily bad. I'm going to touch on that again, however. But let me talk about what I think does work. Because I do think if you like films like Insidious, and to a degree the Conjuring films, then this is very much in that wheelhouse. If you like a kind of a slower burn, haunting movie with kind of creepy imagery, stuff going on, that does build up a kind of a haunting kind of atmosphere and a few kind of like supernatural jump scares. This movie has that. This delivers on that. So if you do like that sort of studio produced sort of haunted house movie, that yes, we have seen plenty of at this point. There's no getting around it. But I didn't necessarily think that means this is a bad movie because of that. It just means it is more of the same. But if you like that, then I think you'll like this. Now, I do think what we see on screen, the variety of different kind of paranormal phenomena that is shown on screen, I think is done to a decent standard. You know, I think there is some creepy imagery on display here. Some of it is, again, stuff you've seen before, but it's done well. You know, I gotta say, I thought this movie, the movie's production design and the production value, although not a big budget movie, I actually think it looks fairly decent. I think it's a really relatively well put together movie on a kind of on a production scale. I think this movie looks fairly slick. I think it's all kind of shot very well. I think when we do have these kind of these supernatural stuff happening on screen, it's fairly effective. You know, I think it does have a good amount of kind of stuff that is happening through the movie. I personally feel that, and again, I say this because I'm going to address one of the criticisms I've seen. I think there's a fair amount kind of going on in this movie. It's not an action movie. It's a relatively slow paced movie in regards to, you know, the plot, I suppose, the plot progression. But there is still, it's peppered through the movie. There is a variety of spooky things and, you know, paranormal encounters as the film kind of goes on at a fair number. So I think you do get a fairly good bang for your buck, so to speak. I think the acting is relatively strong here. I didn't think anyone here was a clunker. I actually thought I believed people in their roles. There's one guy who maybe hamming it up a little bit, but he's really only in the American scenes. It's kind of like one of the our main characters, like assistant at work, and he's kind of like a kind of flamboyant stereotype, you know, who works in the kind of the art world. But he doesn't have a huge amount of impact on the screen. I think everyone else does a decent enough job here. The VFX, when we see them again, it's a lower budget movie, but I gotta say, I think it was quite well put on screen and kind of looks spooky. There's quite a lot of kind of like jump scares and stuff. You know, I do think this movie has a, if you like that kind of haunted house style film, there's a lot to enjoy here, I would say. There's some creepy music, and the story, albeit it's not an original story by any means, it's still kind of a somewhat interesting one. This movie takes no risks. So let's say it like that. I mean, if you want a safe a movie which you are gonna, you know, what you're expecting in regards to a kind of haunting movie, this is it. You know, it's not gonna it doesn't reinvent the wheel by any means, but that doesn't mean to say that what we have on screen is necessarily bad. And I've seen a lot of criticism that levelled at this movie because it really is sticking to what you have seen before, and that's fair to say, but I don't think it necessarily means that this movie is bad. It just means it is what you have seen before. But it doesn't necessarily think that, oh, that's bad quality because of it. That's the difference, I think. And yes, it's worth acknowledging that this movie is very much a series of scenes which you have seen in other films, if I'm honest, but those scenes are still performed well. They look good. I think there are some kind of some issues we'll talk about in a minute, but for the most part, I think it's a well presented film. So let's discuss some of these kind of maybe the drawbacks of this movie. I mean, and let me just kind of address that one. Yes, I mean, this movie is very, very reminiscent of haunting movies, and it follows a template that we've seen in many films before. It doesn't really sort of take any risks. It is very much reminiscent, particularly of the Insidious movies. You know, we kind of go into the kind of the ghost realm in the last act of the movie, and it kind of looks very similar to that. So it isn't original. That's fair to say. But, you know, again, I don't necessarily think this makes it a bad film necessarily. Where I do think this movie, you know, you could level some criticism about that. I think, for example, the music is a little bit overdone. You know, it has these like kind of sort of sound effects when something's, you know, relatively mild paranormal happening on screen to kind of give you this this kind of little jump scare. I'm thinking it's a little bit sort of over the top in regards to, you know, giving you these kind of big sound effects and stuff and musical swells when something's spooky's happening, and it's kind of like, you know, it could have dialed down a little bit with that, and some of the jump scares, I think, it's become a little bit cheap because I think it's just trying to blast you with a kind of a sudden musical swell to kind of get you to go when it could have, I think, been a bit more organic in regards to that. The visuals, it's a lower budget movie. And there are maybe choices that could have been made to make it more unique. I mean, it's no denying it is very similar. When we see our kind of demon at the end, it's not a particularly impressive. It's a guy on stilts and stuff. It still kind of looks fun, but it is sort of lower budget. As I've mentioned, there is kind of one character who I think lets the acting down a little bit, and but I think that one character shouldn't sort of like really paint the rest of the cast with a kind of a bad acting brush. There are some questions, as this woman is meant to be like American Italian, but she goes to Italy and can clearly speak Italian, but everyone speaks to her in English and stuff like that. And when she's talking to her father, why are they speaking in English and things? So there's a few kind of like little rubs here that you think, okay, that's clearly done for an American audience and stuff like this. I think the movie doesn't quite make sense. I think it has this, I mean, it has a kind of a twist towards the end. And, you know, it's a sort of one of these films where you think, what's going to be the reveal here? It's like, it almost would have been a twist if it didn't have a twist. Is the best way I would describe this. But even when we think about the movie as a whole and what we've been seeing, I'm thinking, okay, so it doesn't quite explain some of the kind of the stuff at the beginning. Certainly in the kind of the when we're seeing paranormal stuff happening in the kind of the crematorium, for example. You know, that it sets out certain rules, and I don't think it quite sort of sticks to them to a degree. I have seen some criticism that the movie is slow. It's not an action movie, as they say. I don't necessarily think that, but if we do want, you know, a fast-paced, bloody, gory movie, this certainly isn't it. But it's of a similar kind of pace to, as they say, the Conjuring or the Insidious movies. If you like haunted house movies, I would suggest that you probably would like this, but just don't expect it to kind of see anything you haven't really seen before. So I do think this movie is slightly harshly judged from what I've seen. I actually don't think this is a bad movie at all. In actual fact, outside of it being sort of very much a collection of scenes that you've seen before, and certainly kind of like having you know, the scary scenes that are done to death. You know, the characters facing the camera and we see something walking behind, and then the character turns around and it's gone. I mean, how many times have we seen that? You know, I still think it's a relatively well put together horror movie, and is, you know, it's an effective movie. I think it's people are just getting their kind of their critical minds clouded with the fact that it's so generic in regards to it's so similar in what you've seen before. But to me, that isn't necessarily a reason to dox this film and to kind of like critique it, because I think you do still have to judge it, the art of the film, how it's made, not necessarily the amount of originality that it's got. I mean, I guess it's worth, you know, having that conversation, certainly, but I certainly wouldn't chastise the film too much for it. I'm going to give it a. Do I give it a 5 or a 6 out of 10? I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10 because I do think the quality of the movie is still making it a watchable film. It's a relatively well polished film, and you know, a fair movie, probably slightly above average for your kind of average haunted house movie. There you go. What do you think about it? Leave me a comment and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Come join the party. Subscribe to the Geek Legion of Doom.